Hi, I'm Ted Haftegabber, founder and producer of Live Talks Los Angeles. Thanks for joining us. Since we started over a decade ago, we have brought you hundreds of conversations with storytellers, writers, actors, musicians, humorists, chefs, and thought leaders in business and science. You can watch and hear most of these in our YouTube channel and our podcast. For details, visit livetalksla.org. And now, here's the show you've tuned in to see.
Thanks for being with us. We're going to have a fun chat tonight. I'm going to try not to get to all my questions, so you have time for some at the end, so be thinking about those. For me, as I think this book will be for a lot of you, if you haven't read it yet, kind of my life flashing before my eyes, as I've said, because I was a Rolling Stone subscriber from 1973 forward. And for me, growing up in a little town in Ohio, going to the pharmacy, waiting to find when the magazine was going to be delivered. It was like a dispatch from this counterculture world that did not exist in my suburb. And so the book, of course, is an autobiography and touches on a lot of other things in publishing empire that included Us Weekly and other magazines and books, but it's also largely a history of Rolling Stone. And so if you're like me and you go back to it a little bit, like every time you mention a cover in the book, I can see it in my mind because those covers are so vivid. And of course, you talk a lot about those Annie Leibovitz covers. So anyway, it's quite a time trip. But first, you've been doing a few of these book events, and you did one with Bruce Springsteen last week. And I want to hear about what kind of interviewer Bruce Springsteen is. I know you're buddies, but did he do any gotchas where he like snuck one in on you that was kind of hard?
No gotchas. A few I hadn't heard before. He had sent, we see each other frequently, and so he was pretty well prepared. And you always in that kind of situation, because I used to at Rolling Stone not be a fan of and really discourage this kind of celebrity interviews structure, because generally it's just two egomaniacs. Who are talking about themselves, they're not asking each other any questions. So you don't learn anything. So it's not that we're either that I'm a celebrity or he's an egomaniac, although probably egomaniac fills in there somewhere. But he was able, he had his topics organized and knew how to, just elicit the conversation, keep the conversation moving. So it was very easy. But he asked me a question which I thought I hadn't had before. I thought about it in the book. He said, well, what made you do all this? What did you ever sit and think? What inside you? What pushed you along? And it made me really think. I really didn't answer that question, in the book. And I realized, thinking back on it, I thought about it, because I always thought that I was somebody special, which hadn't occurred to me, and it resonated with him, and he had thought the same. And I think it's that people who have some kind of talent, small or other, probably recognize it in themselves in some way, that they have some drive to do something that they know how to do. I bet that's pretty standard, unique stuff. Anyway, the question was, he was a very good interview. It was a lot of fun to do.
And I heard he ribbed you for not putting him on the cover in 1975.
Yes, he did. Yeah, he did. He was it was fun. And I thought the pleasure for the audience was not so much the information that came out, but sort of the looking at a somewhat intimate relationship and being on inside of something very friendly and special, and you got an insight into that.
Yeah. And of course, a lot of people may know that Jon Landau, his longtime manager, was he your original record review editor at Rolling Stone?
He started on issue 1.
Okay.
He wrote in issue 1.
And you talk in the book about some of the early reviews and how people had very distinct attitudes that maybe you didn't always want in the magazine later on, and that John could be kind of dismissive of certain things, but he loved R&B and soul.
He loved R&B and soul. That was his thing, and he threatened me to quit if I kept editing out his negative references to the West Coast groups and the San Francisco groups, which he hated, and then I had to admit I was editing it out. and I would leave him alone from then on out. But yeah, he brought that really valuable insight and taste to Rolling Stone in those early days of that stuff, of Stax and Aretha, Wilson Pickett, and those were his big critical contributions to the magazine. And I think he also schooled Bruce in the same way at the same time, and those things that he had picked up when he was in college.
Yeah.
There's such an intimidating atmosphere. It's all dark.
We know they're out there. It's a little dark out there. I just want to ask you about like Rolling Stone in culture. Rolling Stone covered culture, but Rolling Stone has also infiltrated culture and even become a part of popular mythology. And I'm thinking of that because I know Cameron Crowe a little bit, and I've followed the progress of this Broadway musical he has opening, I think just in a few weeks, of Almost Famous, which of course is based on the movie Almost Famous. And then going back to Dr. Hook and the Medicine Show with cover of the Rolling Stone, which was seemed like a great kind of cheat to actually convince you to put them on the cover of Rolling Stone. Is that how that worked? Because you did give in eventually.
We did. You had to. I mean, kind of saw me. They deserved it. I mean, how could you not? And to this day, you know, they're dining out on it, and I'm dining out on it. So God bless them. But about the culture, I mean, early on in the end of the 60s or 70s, we saw these things, well, we were being co-opted by mainstream culture, you know, and that we were selling out, of course, and we were being co-opted. And I said, no, quite the opposite. We are co-opting mainstream culture. They're not co-opting us. And it's more like a middling, you know, moving together, because mainstream culture turned into rock culture, you know, and it turned into long hair and all the kind of things and the values and all that stuff. And we really kind of took over the culture, you know, and the contrary. And I think, you know, when you see Broadway's got half of the shows, a third of shows are rock musicals. I mean, Almost Famous is one of them, but they've got Michael Jackson on there, and they've got who else? You know, everybody. Who have we seen on Broadway, the rock shows? Anyway, so.
Yeah. Did you talk with Cameron much about Almost Famous, either the movie or the show that he's working on now?
No, I had very little input on it. I just, on the Broadway, he asked me about the Broadway musical. I just forget about the stuff about the magazine. Go for the love story. That's all people care about. And we'll see.
Well, in Almost Famous, the movie, I feel like it's a fairy tale in some ways. And reading in this book about the origins of Rolling Stone, it almost has this fairy tale quality. I think you compared it to like kids building a car for the soapbox derby or something. Because the origins were so humble. I mean, that there was no investor money coming from overseas or anything when you ragtag kids got together.
Yeah, I call everybody, say, hey kids, come on, let's build a soapbox, and while we're at it, we're going to put out this newspaper at the same time. And everybody came over to the garage. No, I think that Cameron's movie, Almost Famous, is really a true story of what it was like for us in those days, of our writers and reporters going on the road with bands or moving in with them. I mean, and spending time with them and getting into all the stuff and really becoming quite friends with them, and then always being able to produce a story really from the inside of it, you know, that give the kind of access that they gave nobody else and maybe fewer people are asking. But it's Cameron's movie is a love letter to Rolling Stone, I think, and a love letter to those days, you know, and to the joy which he shows in that movie about his own life and growing up in rock and roll, that it was true of, I think, all of us in one way or another.
Yeah. Well, going back further than that, I'm curious when, obviously you talk about it in the book, but one thing I was surprised about was that even though people associate you with San Francisco and then eventually New York, but you did at least a little bit of your growing up down here in Palos Verdes, right?
Right.
And it sounds like the way you describe it, of course this was early 60s, I think, that it was almost kind of like a preppy culture, to use a term that had not been coined yet.
Well, it was a boarding school, and so it was, I guess, college preparatory, which is where that prep comes from.
Yeah.
And I was in Palos Verdes. I had a great time there. I loved it. You know, it's a formative experience. And I ended up there editing a school newspaper, writing a column for the local community newspaper, a weekly column, and editing a high school yearbook, and then putting out a little underground publication at the same time for students, which I called the Sardine, because the theme of the school is the dolphins and nautical stuff, and they're mariners, so the Sardine, why not? And it had, the slogan was all the news that fits. Then we had a front page column called Random Notes. So the origins, therefore.
Okay, all right.
Does anybody gets that? I don't know.
Familiar phrases, yeah. And was there any sort of signal moment that made you switch over to counterculture sensibilities? Was it the Beatles and Elf Sullivan and like everybody else, and kind of following that to its natural conclusion, or a path that wove through what was happening in San Francisco, or was there any like single moment that kind of made you rebellious, or was it more just really loving the music?
Well, I was always rebellious. I mean, let's start there. My mother said I was the most difficult child she ever knew, and she was a child psychologist specialist. So she said, and I say that seriously. She would say, I mean that. That was always nice to hear. No, but I mean, you fall in love with music, when you're really young. I mean, Elvis came out when I was like 10 or something like that. So that's the beginning of it. But I mean, if you're asking where did I start to understand this stuff about, get this notion of culture that would be sensibility that show up in Rolling Stone, it was really at college, the kind of confluence of politics, drugs, and music. It all kind of went into Rolling Stone that way. But it wasn't a decisive, I think I'll get this kind of culture stuff going now, A lot of drugs. I can't get a laugh out of this.
When those first
drugs is usually so reliable, it's that thing.
When those first few issues were coming out in '67, well, first I have to ask, you were just kind of sending magazines out to distributors without them asking for it, right?
We didn't know. I mean, I had this notion about putting out the magazine and what should be in it, and the contents, and I didn't really know anything about ads, any of the rest of it. I had no idea about the business. And really, about a month before we were going to go to press or ready to go, it just, how do you get it out? Duh. I mean, I even thought of the idea that somehow it has to get from here to there. How do you do that? Hand carts or trucks? I don't know. So anyway, I asked somebody to check it out, and it turned out there's a magazine distributor in San Francisco, the only one, and that distributor distributed only one magazine, was Yachting Magazine. Okay. So I don't know, they ordered us, they sent our labels to ship out 40,000 copies in boxes to various people, places around the country, to wholesale distributors. None of them, they had not asked anybody, did they want this magazine? So of the 40,000, we got back in unopened boxes, 34,000 of them came back. But the 6 that stuck, I guess apparently we're selling in New York and the Village in Boston, around the campus, and various oddball places. And the first letter we ever got from to the editor was from a woman named Cookie Sills in Paducah, Kentucky. And that told me something right there. We were screwed. No. And, I didn't realize any of this, but it gradually started to take enough, and then you get a response in letters, and some people saw it, and people, they liked it a lot, and so it was kind of good reason to keep going. But there was no financial reason to keep going, no demand for it out there. But it grew slowly, but steadily. And, as about a year and a half in, we switched distributors to somebody in New York who was a little better, who was I heard about them too. They were distributing Crawdaddy. Now that's a big magazine, you can see. But what they specialized in was softcore porn. So they were on the losing end of a weird market. And they took on Rolling Stone. All of a sudden, our circulation went up to 50,000 from 7,000. So by leaps and bounds.
And it's fun to look back on who you had on the cover in some of those early years. I mean, even through the early '70s. I mean, I remember the first issue I bought in 1973 had Dan Hicks from Dan Hicks and the Hot Licks on the cover with his head against a woman's crotch. So it was a little provocative. But you had people like Captain Beefheart on the cover, and people we would consider very obscure, but newsstand sales were not really the premium. You just assumed everybody would buy it.
I wasn't even aware that the cover had that big an impact. Whether that it conferred the identity of the magazine, or that it impacted sales, and desirability. I mean, we had like Sun Ra on the cover. Does anybody know who Sun Ra is? All right. Okay. So we were so cool. We had Sun Ra on the cover. But it was influenced by all kinds of people's friends, or you knew people, what you liked, or somebody who was really influential in the magazine and said, "Oh, we got to put this one on the cover." It's pretty random.
Yeah. It reminds me of the early days of Saturday Night Live when you're thinking, okay, Dr. John was the musical guest instead of Mariah Carey or something, you know. At one point, surely you saw the power of the cover culturally, if not newsstand sales, when you had John and Yoko naked on the cover with not the front side that was on the front of the Two Birds album, but the back side. And was that a point at which you sort of realized, okay, that we can really make a statement or get attention with the cover?
I didn't really think of it that way. I mean, I can't emphasize how naive I was about the business of magazines and marketing and public relations. That just wasn't stuff that, you know, that came to me naturally that I knew much about. I mean, it's easy to figure out you're going to get some controversy if you put the naked pictures of worldwide superstar on the cover. You know, that people would like that. But I suppose you get surprised by how big it is, even if it was small at the time. You know, how wide the public consciousness is and how you impact it. But again, we didn't really set out to do that kind of thing, I think, until we did a groupies issue. You know, I think, well, for sure, the power of sex, you know, sexuality and controversy, the salaciousness will sell and attract attention, which in fact it did. But, you know, generally decisions were made primarily on the basis of its inherent value and worth. You know, its artistic validity or, you know, commercial, you know, importance, or, you know, critical importance.
Yeah. And soon, very soon really, in the overall scheme of things, started winning national magazine awards and things like that were probably not part of your dream in 1967, but were happening by the early 70s. And there was a lot of politics and breaking stories about Patty Hearst, which is something I remember, who's Patty Hearst, and reading this very long form story and it had a really artistic cover. And was that part of the dream in 1967? Like, yeah, we're going to do politics and we're going to do these long, or did that come later?
No, it was. It started well before that. I mean, first off, I was always politically oriented as a kid and grew up in politics, so I was just naturally interested in it. So we had it in Rolling Stone in bits and pieces, you know, from the beginning. But in 1972, putting Hunter on the campaign trail with the McGovern campaign, which was a big anti-war election, the first election where 18-year-olds were enfranchised to vote, really put us on the map more than any other single thing. Because first through Hunter's genius, but by putting something so brilliant in the middle of a real true national story, which is an election. I mean, the stories don't get more, the news beat doesn't get heavier and more prestigious in this country than the White House beat or the national election beat. And so having somebody on that and then writing significant stuff that everybody was paying attention to, people inside the campaign, other reporters, writers, you know, we became celebrated for that. And that was our first real impact in national affairs. And when it woke me up and Hunter up to what the possibilities were, you know, if we stayed with this beat, you know, and kept covering elections. And so we went from Hunter to Dick Goodwin to Bill Grider, and always had a full-time national correspondent on from 1972, from third or fourth year into it. And from that, you see, you know, what the pleasures and awards are of engaging in big stories, and national stories, and heavy-duty reporting stories. We were reporting on the narcotics enforcement bureaucracy and raids and all that kind of stuff, and drug enforcement, and, you know, from the beginning of the 70s, and trying to call that beat out. And we were writing about the environment and climate change starting in 1970. So from the early on, we were taking real serious responsibilities for these things, as well as the rock coverage and as well as the cultural coverage.
Yeah. Looking at the bylines that are in here that everybody knows or that I've forgotten, a lot of great rock writers, of course, and then names that became famous like Joe Esterhaus. I remember before Basic Instinct and all that, like he wrote Fists, Sylvester Stallone's post-Rocky movie. And I was like, I'm going to go see this because it's that writer from Rolling Stone I like, which was probably not that many people were part of the audience for that, but that was my reason for going.
No, there wasn't a big audience for it anyway.
Yeah.
I remember Joe dragging me over to his house, going in and said, I want you to come over to dinner. One night, I went over there and he said, okay, I've been working part-time on another thing, and what can you say at this point? And he says, I've been writing this thing, and he tells me about Stallone and what's his name, the director or the producer, I forget his name. But, so he says, here's what I've done. And he hands me this 400-page script. And I knew enough, I said, well, who do you think is going to do this? He was such an egomaniac, Joe. And he said, I said, who do you think is going to do this? Oh, it's going to be a 2-part movie. I don't think so, Joe. But anyway. Yeah. But Joe, Howard Cohn, Tim Cahill, Grover Lewis, Michael Rogers, Tim Krause, Bob Greenfield, all these people, names you don't know, even have gone on to distinguished writers other places and books, and really quite the lineup of really the best and most interesting journalists and writers of the era.
Yeah. So safe to say, though, probably the two biggies as far as people who've read Rolling Stone over the years are concerned are Hunter S. Thompson and Tom Wolfe.
Fair enough.
Yeah. And you could do a whole book on Hunter, and I think you did publish some kind of compendium of Hunter, but how much did you want to... Hunter's in here quite a bit, and people may be surprised. I know they think that you probably fought a lot, and he projected that kind of personality, that he would be pugnacious, but sounds from this like your feelings that was largely for show.
Well, Hunter was just loud and, big language and all that stuff, and large night. But Hunter and I never had a crossword ever. Never had a fight. Nothing. I mean, we'd always call each other brain dead or, heelless iguanas or some. There's a lot of insult going back and forth and like that. But we were great friends, and we were very, very close friends. And we had a very close relationship as editor and publisher. I loved Hunter. I think Hunter loved me. And we had lots of laughs together. The families were close. And it's just one of those wonderful relationships of camaraderie and fun. And we did a lot of pranks and practical jokes, but in this great artistic fit where I loved his work and loved his writing and just cherished it. And he knew I knew how to handle that work and edit that work better than anybody else because his sensibility for it, knew where he was going with it. And until really he got too deep into drugs and drink and just had a difficult time writing again and being productive, we had a long stretch. And we're close friends till the very, very end. It was a great, wonderful relationship. And he brought lots to the magazine, ideas, but kind of sensibility and the spirit of it, and just the fact that he was so good in shining and what he could do, set an example for the rest of the staff and turned everybody on, and made everybody else want to raise their game and also be polished like Hunter and report like Hunter and do important stories like Hunter. So he really set a bar there. At the same time that Hunter started, I was also in the middle of romancing Tom Wolfe, who was well established with the electric Kool-Aid acid test in his earlier magazine journalism, and got him to write for us. And actually, he came up permanently to become a full-time contributing editor for us. And we did together The Right Stuff and Bonfire of the Vanities and a bunch of other things in between. But those are his two greatest works. And had a wonderful time with him. Completely opposite of Hunter, a gentleman, calm, quiet, no raised words, no, all crazy behavior. Much different individual.
On a more mundane level, I have to ask about the history of record reviews over the years a little bit, because in the early days, you had some writers who were very antagonistic toward bands. And so it's funny, I just posted this interview I did with you for Variety online, and somebody mentioned Led Zeppelin review and how Rolling Stone dissed Led Zeppelin. And the writer of one of those reviews piped up, who knew he was still around, and said, I was right, they still suck, but that was the kind of thing the magazine had to recover from some of those days. And Lester Bangs and the more kind of antagonistic critics didn't last very long.
Rock and roll criticism, was a new field. Even the idea that it was called rock critics was kind of like a little pretentious. But we became an 800-pound gorilla of the field, and there was also the New York critics. So the very first Rolling Stone, first 3 or 4 records in Rolling Stone, I wrote entirely myself, reviewing all the records. That you can't do for long. So I forget what happened. Then So at some point, I turned it over to a staffer. It was kind of crazy. And people, we'd take reviews if you sent it in with a self-addressed stamped envelope, you're likely to get published as not. And then Greel took it over, and Greel started to shape it up and brought in writers like, he brought in Lester Bangs, for example, and others. And it was really idiosyncratic writing. In the case of some of it, like Lester Bangs, I mean, they really weren't reviewing the records. They were like this guy wrote the Led Zeppelin thing. They were writing about the clothes and the album jacket, and they were looking for an opportunity to do this kind of riff on using the group. And it wasn't about the record. It was just an opportunity to write a really nasty, clever, smart-ass review. And I just got rid of them all because I thought, this is not the purpose. I mean, they're good writers, but it's not what we're here for. We're here to, give a responsible critique and encouragement and assessment for our readers and for the artists of the merit of a record, and the whys and wherefores. So it's part of this process, that creative process that exists. Greel took it very seriously. It was a little too academic, and then John Landau took over. And then it became very heavy duty with John, and everything was strict and this and that. But it's always been a bit idiosyncratic. It's always reflected the personality of the person editing that section at the time. At one time, Paul Nelson was the editor for a long time. And it's gone back and forth over the years. So finally, in the end, I don't know, 24 years ago, I added the stars on it and tried to start making it kind of more of a uniform, professional, less idiosyncratic thing, because it was really getting to be a kind of consumer service situation, and a, meaningful measure to the artists, and record companies that, was way more important than putting out sort of idiosyncratic essays about things.
Yeah. And of note,
and I mean, we panned Led Zeppelin. I mean, maybe for right or wrong, but I think for wrong. And nobody was immune. I think, let's see, John Landau, like, he panned Cream.
yeah.
And we are blamed for the breakup of Cream. In fact, Eric Clapton said when he read our review of Cream about how cliched they were and something else, that he then immediately broke up the band, and it was our fault. And then he went to Woodstock because he wanted to join the band, and hung around there for a month, but they never asked him. And then also I guess, either caused or predicted the end of Big Brother and the Holding Company by pointing out the mere fact that she was like 25 times head and shoulders above her band. But anyway, it had serious purpose it had to serve institutionally, and that had to win out.
Yeah. And
now you know.
Yeah. And Rolling Stone, point out for people.
And Lester Bangs died because of that. No. Anything for a laugh, I can't get it. Help me.
And Rolling Stone, which you have nothing to do with anymore, just dumped the star ratings, which seemed like some kind of end of an era. and you thought that was a mistake.
I think it's a mistake, but I don't care.
Yeah.
I have no power over it, and maybe they're right. Probably not.
And there were it seems like everything kind of got repaired eventually in terms of like it's even kind of the linchpin of the plot of Almost Famous, which is sort of based on Cameron and the Eagles, and the Eagles hated Rolling Stone for some reason, and I know how easy it is for Don Henley to hate anything because I've seen that in action. But
he told me he hates you.
He's always telling me the other rock critics he hates when I talk to him. And then I talk to the other rock critic and they go, I've only ever written positive things about him. What's he talking about?
Henley, when we had our 25th anniversary celebration of Rolling Stone, a big star-studded dinner and all that stuff. And Henley was one of the 6 people who spoke there and celebrated the occasion. So, but he get up and he starts to read, but then he goes through every single thing we ever wrote about the Eagles and discusses it, what was right about it, wrong, and name checks the writer and calls out the writer. That was his speech at the Rolling Stones. It was in good humor, but sort of.
And Queen famously sent one of your favorite letters to the
Roger
editor.
Taylor. We had again said something, and he sent a letter addressed to us full of scroll stuff, but he had written it on a barf bag, that kind of airplane convenience bag for air sickness, and he sent it on that, and I have it. But that's got to keep that.
to talk about John Lennon a little bit, because I was telling you back in the green room that I feel like my inordinate love of Q&As may go back to reading Lennon Remembers, which a lot of you will know was first in the magazine, and then you published as a book called Lennon Remembers, and it's often quoted. You know, you can go on any classic rock forum to this day, and someone will be quoting John Lennon from this as he talks about the same stuff he talked about in music at the time. Don't believe in Beatles, and he went into why he did not believe in Beatles in great measure, and said bad things about Paul McCartney, and then later he kind of made it sound like he was just in a bad mood or something when he said some of those stuff.
He came to call it Lennon regrets. But you said you were influenced by. I was curious, why would you be so influenced?
I think I read it in book form. Like I was a little bit younger, so I was becoming like a major Beatlemaniac in 1973, and the book by that time had been out for a couple of years. But I was
broken up for a while too.
I was just poring over every page, trying to figure out why the Beatles broke up and what John's true feelings were, and how you engaged with him to elicit all this stuff. And so that, I think, you know, to this day is an influence on me on just how conversational to make journalism when you're working in that format. And so I'm curious what you were feeling at that time in terms of wanting to draw him out, and then like, were you taken aback, like, oh, I can't believe he's saying all this stuff?
Well, you go into the interview prepared, and to make it work well, you have to really do a lot of research, write out your questions, map them out, and get them a structure so they flow from one to the other. So you have to be at the same time you've got that following, you're also trying to listen to the interview and think ahead to what might be next, and whether you should be going with this script or responding to something following up on that question. So he, though, from the beginning, it was clear he had this bunch of stuff on his mind that he wanted to say, you're just going to have to go with it. And I was half listening to it and half paying attention to the process. You know, and when he started saying all these things about McCartney, which were I was prepared for, but I was really surprised that he was going to say all that. I mean, he had been in primal therapy as a form of, you know, psychotherapy that once existed here in Los Angeles. And so he's trying to be very open and honest and expose all his hurt feelings and be just, you know, brave about everything. But it was a bit of a shock, you know, but I figured he knew what he was doing. He was 28 at the time. I think I was 25, or so that in that age range. So, and looking back at that, you're still a kid really then, you know, and you're not quite prepared for all the stakes here. But you know, I knew, you know, I had a really important document there, and it to this day is the definitive interview by any of them about what the Beatles was like, and the key piece of Beatle history.
Yeah. Were you, sometimes people are more of a John guy or a Paul guy. Were you more of a John guy?
I was a John guy, yeah. He was the clever Beatle, remember that. He was the smart Beatle.
And you eventually become friends with, as you talk about in the book, you became friendlier with Paul over the years. And then Yoko was kind of looking askance at that, like she felt you were cheating on John or something by becoming friends with Paul or something like that.
So you are a scholar of all this. Yeah. I mean, she, you know, it was an interesting and complicated thing to be in the middle of. It's fascinating historically to be privy to this kind of conversation and discussion by Yoko or by Paul and all of them about the others, you know, because it was quite the soap opera and quite the relationship with them all. And to be near it and over here and eavesdrop on some of it was really quite fascinating and, you know, quite privileged. And then we got very close to Yoko over the years, and so heard all of it all the time from her end. And, you know, she had her point of view, and half it was right and half it was wrong, you know, and there's a lot of bitterness.
Yeah. And you had the second Naked John and Yoko cover, which this time was much more sober because it was after John's death. And I still wonder if that might be like the most famous magazine cover image of all time, is the one you published right after John's death where she's cradling.
I can't think of anything more famous or powerful. I mean, it was won every kind of magazine, art directors, photography award for being the cover of the decade and the last century. I think it may be one of the most celebrated magazine in history. I mean, but the coincidence of that particular image of him naked in a birth or death situation, clutched around her, and then the circumstance in which that picture was published of his death, it was inescapable.
Yeah.
Just, I mean, powerful beyond belief.
So over
Too
time,
tough to look at on a
yeah.
steady basis, I find.
Over time, I think you had a welcoming. The magazine generally had a welcoming attitude towards most musicians, and if there were some rough patches over early reviews, it seems like you kind of got over them. But was there anybody who sort of never made good with the magazine, or just never?
I guess Roger Taylor, perhaps. I don't know. Jimmy Page came around. I don't think Joni Mitchell forgave us for running that chart in issue 15 where we did the interconnected map of love lives in Hollywood, in Laurel Canyon of Hollywood. And she was interconnected with more people than anybody else, and she didn't see that as serious journalism, and I don't know. Yeah, fuck her. But she was angry for a long time, but we made up. Trying to think, I think I can't. John Bon Jovi has forgiven me because he got into the Hall of Fame, so he's no longer pissed off. I think, over the period of time, anybody serious, I understood what the purpose and the point of Rolling Stone was, which is to do its job and its service and what its mission was in terms of music and musicians and the supporting of musicians, supporting the music in general and advocating for it and for giving fair critique of it and coverage of it and keeping it enshrined as an American cultural institution. There were overwhelmed any particular personal bitches or grievances, but I'm sure there's always some asshole there. I don't know. Can't think of anybody. Okay. I'm able to go out safely.
I know you said Paul Simon was a little cold, but that's
Okay, I forgot Paul.
But that's not really over anything you wrote. That's just his personality, right?
Yeah. This is my diss tour. All I'm talking about people that I've written about them, get more gossip about them. And anyway, go ahead. What else can I and he's really short. Did I tell you about Mick?
But since you brought up the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, because I didn't get to talk with you about this before, and that's obviously part of the book is your role in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and you sort of abdicated some of that in recent years, but people always used to blame you if they weren't in the Hall of Fame, like you were the sole arbiter of who got in and who got out. And was that true? No, I know it's not true.
Not at all true. But it's a useful fantasy. If you're not being wanted, not being properly elected fairly by the voting public, to blame me for that. Oh, everybody else wants me in, but Jann, he's an asshole. And there were a few people like that, were angry about it. But by and large, I think people understood the gravity and the importance of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And I set up deliberately that the voting be closed, private ballot voting, secret ballot voting, by 700, 800 people so that no single individual could tip it or a lobbying effort. It was really dispersed. So I think it's been very fair. And the results over the years have shown that everybody meaningful has gotten in. There are very few quarrels about it. There's very few quarrels. A few people got in probably shouldn't have gotten in for one reason or another. But, it's not my fault.
Are you glad that now there's less of that? Now that you
Well, I'm not active in it anymore. I retired as chairman several years ago.
Yeah.
I'm still involved, but the acts are being inducted today after they become eligible for the work 25 years ago. I don't really know them that well, listen that carefully, or feel confident in making judgments about them and their worthiness or relative or not. And so I'm always kind of the person, if I was voting, would vote for, and now I am a voter, the old ones that I'm familiar with. Whereas really the imperative now is to start getting some of the newer acts. Like there's no question that hip hop belongs in it, but I couldn't really tell you which ones were really meritorious or not.
want to get off Rolling Stone just for a minute because your publishing empire extended to, I mean, there were a lot of early magazines like Outside, and you had an ecological magazine in the late 60s, early 70s. Mm-hmm. You had a political magazine. You really were covering a lot of stuff, but then Us Weekly is way up there. I mean, financially, it eclipsed Rolling Stone at a certain point.
Right.
And you deal with that quite a bit in the book. And it sounds like that was a fun era for you, that you didn't look down on celebrity gossip. You were looking to find a way to make it fun and if not noble, respectable.
Noble. Yeah, I mean, Us Weekly was a series of fortuitous accidents and changes, and it took a long time. When we bought it 10 years before we made it weekly, we had it going as a monthly, and it was kind of getting, the first iteration was as a quality entertainment magazine. And then it really took off when we made it, got to the understanding that entertainment should be treated as news, not as, for the purpose of the magazine, that people were consuming it as news, and this gossip and fashion, all stuff. And once we realized, and it was a women's magazine. Once we made those realizations, the thing took off real fast. But part of it was to distinguish itself from, it needed to be distinguished from people, so it was younger and colorful and hip. And you had to also distinguish it from the National Star and Enquirer and Touch, the magazine that came along and imitated it. So we tried to do it as people mocked, not mocked, but didn't believe it, as a kind of quality gossip magazine that should be governed by traditional rules of journalism, having to do with fairness, accuracy, objectivity. And we made very few mistakes. We were not in news. We were not in the business of investigating people's lives. We didn't really do it. Now you're tarred by association. So it's hard for people to believe that, but it was true. And people respected it, and it became a huge hit magazine, for maybe 10 years. Yeah. Or it kind of took over all the other magazines around, and people loved it, and it was on TV, and it was a cultural reference point, and this, that, and the other thing. And it was fabulously successful financially. And I learned a lot from doing it at the same time as doing Rolling Stone, because with Rolling Stone had no competition. So, and no direct competition. So Us was the first time I was involved in a competitive circumstance. Us was the first time I was involved in making really critical, important news judgments all the time. So you're there making a decision what's going to be covered, and you're thinking what the other magazines are going to do, and they get to the story first, and all the classic news competitive stuff, writing, selling headlines on covers, making decisions, news decisions that cost you a couple $100,000. You make or change your fortune every week by several $100,000, depending on what you chose for the cover. And it was just fun, because we weren't being heavy duty going after people. We were having laughs with it all. And, given the fact that the big news of the day was Brad and Angelina, or Jennifer and Brad, or whatever Brad was doing, that it was kind of a fun news field to be in, silly, low calorie, but it was a game almost. And the people who we were covering, Brad, whatever, they were in the game too. It wasn't like we were intruding into their lives too deeply. They depended on this. They wanted it. They solicited it by either directly, in the case of Angelina, or indirectly, just by being there. You don't have to go to every movie premiere with your kids. You don't have to cavort around at Gelson's or I don't know, whatever they do. And but it was total fun.
Yeah. And I was late 90s were sort of a great time for print journalism and magazines, and that was the time when I went from newspapers to magazines. I started working for Time Warner and Entertainment Weekly, and it was a lot of fun. I remember okay, is Rolling Stone going to get the cover if it was a music person, or are we? And there was this kind of competition that's kind of hard to imagine now that that's all gone away.
Entertainment Weekly, I'm sorry, was never competition.
Okay.
I don't mean that.
we thought you were the competition.
Just stay in line, buddy.
All right. But it seemed like in the late 90s, early 2000s, magazines are huge. It was an exciting time for me to be in Manhattan when I went out there and just be around the magazine publishing world. And it seemed like it would never end. and then of course the internet came along and everything changed. And so it seems like, at least in the book, it goes very quickly from Us Weekly is at the top of the world, especially, and Rolling Stone's doing well too, to, oh no, we've got to sell. And first Us Weekly, and then Rolling Stone much later. But
Well, the internet destroyed it all. You know, they sucked the blood out of the news business, out of magazine and newspaper. They stole, without compensation, all the editorial product that we produced at great cost, because it was of great quality, and people wanted it, we were paying well. And they stole it all free, and then they put it out free on their own sites, Apple, Google News, whatever, and without any compensation whatsoever, no royalty, nothing, you know. And they took our advertisers with that material that they were giving away free in, admittedly, a more deliverable for advertisers form, a more targeted form. It's a more desirable advertising medium, but it was on our backs. They sucked the blood out of it. They left the journalism business to bleed out dry. Not a penny, not a rat. And of course, they have zillions of dollars, and they don't. So I blame them strongly, but you know, there's also the technology of it. It was irresistible, and especially when the iPhone came in and the news could be available. Now everybody had it. It was, you know, once that happened, instead of just the lap desktop, which was a little more anchorable, once it came, but it destroyed some. I mean, in the 90s and the early 2000s, in the 80s, you know, magazines were super consequential mediums. I mean, people lived their lives and they formed ideas around certain magazines, you know, like whether it was Vogue, you know, or Rolling Stone, or, you know, magazines that had powerful editorial personalities that told you how to think and what kind of group you were part of, what your place in the world was in a way. That's a little stronger statement, but that's true of a lot of magazines. I mean, people formed their identity in part around certain magazines, and Rolling Stone was certainly a premium, if not the premier example of that, or one of the premier examples of that. That power, and this is all gone now. Not all gone, but you know, that was the heyday. Probably because you were in it.
And you talk in the magazine. It was much later, after selling Us Weekly, that you sold Rolling Stone.
Right.
I think part of it in 2017 and all of it in 2019, if I remember the dates correctly. And you talk about the twilight of standalone publishers or independent publishers, and you sold to Penske Media, which is my boss technically. I'm right for Variety, so Rolling Stone and Variety.
Disclosure.
Yes. And you're as candid about that as you are about everything else in the book. And I think you describe Jay Penske as something with a bad haircut.
He's a good-looking man with a bad haircut.
Okay. All right.
It was just clever, I thought.
Yeah.
But Jay is a good-looking guy, a very handsome-looking man. But he's got this kind of weird bowl haircut that, for a person as sophisticated as that, you just think he has something doing his hair. I mean, what can I say? I mean, I hope he appreciates it. It's well meant. Jay and Penske is doing a terrific job with the company. They kept it alive. It's making money. It's influential. My son is working there, running the thing, and so I couldn't be happier with what Jay has done with it. I don't agree with the stuff they've done with the magazine, but I don't think it's not their focus primarily. They're focused primarily on the web operation, the other, you know, branding operations. They're doing great at that, and it makes sense. I mean, you know, the magazine's got a diminishing future, but I mean, I think I would do it differently in the same circumstances. But they're doing great, you know. And
I think now they face some of the.
Tell Jay I said that.
Okay. I feel like, you know, Rolling Stone has identity issues, and that goes back to your time, because obviously the audience, the initial audience was aging, and at the same time, I don't know if this wouldn't have been under your reign, but you know, now there's things like BTS covers. But even when you were still there, you know, obviously, you know, you've got to engage the current youth culture to an extent or die.
Well, we were able to cover serious musicians, pop musicians, politics, you know, a wide range of stuff and a wide range of musical tastes. And you always get criticized. Oh, you're turning into a pop magazine, or oh, there's too much politics, or whatever. Everybody's always fishing about something. But we were able to make that mix work powerfully, so that even the people only interested in music would read it and see it, and there was both the article on politics was either something they could digest and read and understand, and there was a sense of importance, and also it conveyed a knowledge and a sense that to the music reader that you were now music, and your love was in a very important magazine, and the whole package was important. We were able to bridge the age gaps because we always covered pop music, teen adults, going way back. I mean, we had David Cassidy was a very famous early cover, and Britney Spears several times, and Justin Timberlake, and always through it, I've always considered a legitimate part of the popular music culture and popular music itself, just as the more serious part. Just Neil Young is a legitimate part. Anyway, so I think I was able to manage that gap. I think although it's still manageable to bridge all that, I'm not on the spot, so I can't swear to it. And I do think now that there's a larger gap than there ever has been between the current audience for what's selling as popular music and what had years ago in my era. I mean, I think there's such a divergence between, whatever, and Neil Young, for example. Just the sound of the music is so different, just this technical thing. But they decided they needed to lower the age group and the demographic, and so they've gone after really heavily. They've gone after all the younger acts and the Korean acts and this thing, and then whatever sells, and rap stuff more than I would have. I would always go to what's in people's minds, what are people thinking about now they care about. I would have put Harry Styles on a cover just like they did now. It was exactly the right time, and I would have even put Korean rock, the BTS, on a cover, but from a much different point of view. They did it like it was like a fan magazine, and they'll involve individual profiles of Bobby Wu and whoever they all are, instead of a examination of the phenomena in Korean culture of what it is. I mean, it's huge. Yeah, but, it's a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking. I would do it differently, of course I would. But I still think the reliable thing is you go with the news and what people are talking about and concerned with. What is really a topic in the conversation right now everybody's talking about? And it can be anything from Korean pop to, Trump, obviously, and all the other things going on. So I think it still mixes together. And they're still doing that mix, not in the way I would do it, but that mix is still alive. That commitment to culture, politics is still there, and I'm delighted.
I'll give you a warning. I'll go to questions in just a question or two. But just to wrap up with how much you revealed of yourself in this book and your identity. And I know this was in part you wanted to tell your own story and not, there'd been another book about Rolling Stone you were not happy with. And that was like 5 years ago. And I guess that's maybe 5 years ago that you decided you needed to tell your own story after all, and was that, and I know part of that was you felt like other books had not covered, whether it was that book or other books, didn't really encapsulate what it meant to grow up in the boomer generation and to grow up in the
Well,
60s.
I always thought Rolling Stone, I thought what I've written here was always going to be a good story, and I was really, frankly, too lazy to do it myself. I thought, and especially while I was still working there, the magazine, I just wouldn't have the time for it. It does take concentration. It takes a long period of time. And writing is like anything else. You have to really get up to speed. You can't be rusty. You have to really do it every day to make it work and make all those things flow. So I was hoping somebody else would do it, and I thought I had somebody who was going to do it, and it turned out to be a really bad judgment on my part, the particular individual. But separate and apart from that, I read it, skimmed it once years ago. When it came out, I never looked at it again. It's certainly not in reference to this. And in fact, didn't want to have anything to do with that in this. My motive here was that I thought I didn't want to write my own autobiography or memoir just about me, because I don't think inherently that'd be that interesting. And it had to do with the story of Rolling Stone, and what it was one to tell, and then you needed a central organizing figure for that and a way to tell the narrative. And it was clearly should be me. And if you put it, and if you covered in this, not just the making of Rolling Stone and me being a premier example baby boomer, raised in Marin County right after the war, going through the public school system and all the things that post-war America was about. That using that as an organizing narrative theme, principle, you could, through the eyes of Rolling Stone, what Rolling Stone did, and telling the story of how Rolling Stone in and of itself, the people who came and made it and where their backgrounds were from and their motives, and then what Rolling Stone saw, what it covered, the issues of the times, the people of the times. You would really tell a really authentic and vivid story of this era, of the rock and roll era, of the post-war baby boom, whatever you call it. And that was my intent in writing it. And because I was retired from Rolling Stone and had health issues, it gave me all the time then to sit down and really write it. I totally enjoyed doing that process, and learning, relearning the process of writing and what it involved. And in part, understanding that to write it correctly, you have to really go back in your mind through all the experiences. And the more you can relive the experience while you're thinking about it, the more rich the writing will become, the more rich the memories are. And so it really was, for me, 3 years of a long trip down, through the 50 years. And it was intense, because I relived every tragedy or triumph of it and doing it. And but I had a great time putting it together. And I think it's turned out to be a satisfactory account of the generation and rock and roll stood for something and meant something, and achieved things that it didn't get fair credit for, and all kinds of social issues at the time, and all kinds of cultural issues, and all kinds of issues of having to do with human justice and equal and rights and fair rights, and played critical roles in them. So I think I wanted to give my era, my generation, its proper historical due. And I had the materials to do it, and the time to do it, and the wherewithal to do it, and I believe the talent to do it. And so there it is. I recommend it.
And I was trying to think about how to describe the writing style in a nutshell, because I know I asked you if you had a ghostwriter, and you said no, it was 100% you, and that may have been a dumb question since you came up as a writer as well as editor, but it's so well written, and I was trying to think of a thumbnail sort of stylistic description, and I started thinking earnest yet pithy, and I felt like that was kind of the voice of Rolling Stone for me early on, was that it took things very seriously, and there were little zingers in there along the way too that kind of punched holes a little bit. So.
But in Rolling Stone, I always thought Rolling Stone should do two things. It should always speak from the inside of a situation, that we were authoritative, we were inside, we knew what we were doing, we knew the artist, whatever. We had been in there long enough to give you a good, complete, honest inside version. But it should never be it should always be authoritative. From the outside, it should look authoritative. It should be able to be read by an outsider as authoritative. So it would have both points of view as an object, and a lot of that, and some wit, wit and humor and stuff like that. But I'll stick with this good writing part. Let's leave it at that. That's nice to hear.
All right, questions from the audience, and there's going to be somebody with a microphone out there.
Yes, I will bring the microphone over. Just a quick reminder, around here questions typically start with a W or an H, sometimes a D. They are generally short. There is no such thing as a two-part question. And tonight, only Chris gets to ask follow-up questions.
Jesus. It's intimidating. I wouldn't go in near it.
Was going to be a two-part question, but now it's a one-part question. Are there any Hunter Thompsons out there today? And I was going to ask, who would you hire if you were going to hire someone with that perspective?
Well, I don't think there's any Hunter Thompson out there. People who try to imitate Hunter and directly are all bad. We did finally come up with one person that came close, named Matt Taibbi, who came in just before the Trump era and covered that campaign and a few others. And he had that same acid wit and he had a much nastier streak than Hunter. Hunter, although he could write viciously, was not an inherently nasty person. I mean, you could say, we're going to burn him, put him in a shroud, and set him out to sea so he could die. But that's funny. I don't know why it's funny, but it is. Whereas, Matt would say, I'd rather jump into a burning vat of oil than the idea. I mean, but he came as close as being as tough and as good a reporter and as strong in his language and vivid as Hunter. But I don't see anybody out there. I never have ever. Then who would I hire? I don't know. Who's around? I don't read too much these days. I don't read magazines that much these days, so I don't really know who's writing these days.
Yes, Charles Freeman here. During the 70s and 80s, at the height of the black music explosion culturally and financially, why was there such little coverage of black music in Rolling Stone?
Well, there wasn't. There was a lot of it. Can you tell me what we missed?
Well, it seems to be that as an avid reader, there really wasn't the type of coverage for, say, like an Earth, Wind & Fire being on the cover and other bands like that who were huge around the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know that. I don't think Earth, Wind & Fire was on the cover. I mean, in the first place, it's primarily a rock magazine, and so it leaned that way. But we took black music in fully in our coverage, in our preview, and we covered from the very early days because we were big fans of the blues, and that was the era of the blues revival. But I don't know, Marvin Gaye's been on the cover a couple of times, Stevie Wonder's been on the cover a couple of times, Michael Jackson. Those are some of the Motown artists, Stax artists, Otis, but that was early. Who else from Stax was on there? Aretha's been on there a bunch of times. I mean, the big R&B stars and big pop R&B stars have all been on there. We didn't have Lionel Richie on. We didn't have the Commodores. We didn't have Jerry Butler. I mean, what you're saying is true. The big but mid-level R&B stars, you had to be just a big star overall to get on it. And same is true with the white rock stars, although the covers were dominated again by the Beatles and the Stones and Dylan and Bruce Slater and Madonna. And same with the R&B. I mean, I think you've got a point, but I don't think it's has anything to do with prejudice or not liking the music or neglecting it. I think I think we can hold our head up very high as having done the best coverage of black music of every era of any magazine that was being published, including the black magazines and the hip-hop magazines. So I think that's a strong statement. I believe it to be true, and I can stand proud of that record. Once I got this asked a question I was at Harvard speaking to a group of people, and somebody in the audience, a woman stands up and says, how come you didn't cover black music properly, and something like that. And I gave the best answer I could. After she comes up to me, and she says she's Quincy Jones' daughter. I said, oh, man. I thought you liked me. Anyway.
Just so I have my chronology straight, did Tom Wolfe write Radical Chic and Mau Mauing the Flatcatchers with Rolling Stone, or if not, when did you guys pick them up?
He wrote Radical Chic for New York Magazine maybe a year before I started Rolling Stone, or maybe in '68, not for Rolling Stone in any case, for New York Magazine. And then he was in the middle of writing Mau Mau, and then when I was trying to look him up then, and I located him, he was in San Francisco in the middle of writing Mau Mauing the Flatcatchers. So I met him in the middle of that piece. And it turned out he was living around the corner for me. I spent a year looking for him. And then after that, after Mau Mauing, he just stayed with Rolling Stone.
What excites you now? Like, what do you do now? I mean, after the book, I mean, you've had such an impact on so many people's lives. I mean, everything is so disposable now. What excites you?
I like just an ordinary. I mean, I really like staying home more than anything. You know, I've got 6 kids. 2 of them are still at home, and a happy family life and nice houses, and I enjoy that so much. I would love to, contemplate doing some more writing if I could figure out that circumstance of what I would like to write about, and just being quiet. We've been traveling, went on safari this year with the kids. That was totally fun. Those small things are satisfying. Enough world-shaking stuff.
So in the 60s and 70s, obviously the drug use was very prominent. So how did you navigate between the duties of running a magazine and, I'm sure, not wanting to be uncool, like, oh, you're doing too much drugs, to the staff, I mean, but at the same time, you didn't want to be like Time and Newsweek, and be uncool, but you also had to run the magazine. So how did you navigate that?
What do you mean? How did I run things taking so many drugs?
I don't mean you personally. I mean, I'm saying people on the staff.
How did they?
Yeah, or if you want to talk about you too, but I meant more of I'm sure you obviously kept it together, but I'm sure there must have been some people who overindulged and.
That's all mythology. There was no drugs at the period. Some people couldn't handle it, but there was not, people were not making enough money to afford that much drugs. Luckily, so I made a policy of keeping everybody's salaries down. Now, some people just got into it, and it was too much, and it flamed some people out. And ultimately, that was Hunter's destruction, was at the hand of too many drugs and too much booze. For myself, I was able to manage it, but I had a particular kind of drive and motivation. I don't think, if we're, I don't think pot bothered anybody particularly, but it was cocaine, which was a destructive drug, and wasted a lot of people's times and a lot of people's lives, and I consider all the time that I put into cocaine to be wasted, thrown away, the money was lost, and nothing really great came out of it. I mean, you could stay up late at night yabbering around with people, but I quote Jimmy Buffett as saying, there's nothing worth saying after 1 a.m. Shut up all day. People just blah, blah, blah. And but it did hurt a lot of people's performance, and it made things a little more tense and ragged than they had to be. That's speaking of cocaine as being the drug of the era.
We have time for 2 more questions.
How did the relationship between Hunter and Ralph begin, and how did it endure so lovingly for so long?
They were 2, souls who spotted and loved each other, and the specifics are, I think the 2 were put together by Warren Hinkle, who ran Scanlon's magazine, where Hunter last wrote before he wrote for us. And it was Hunter who said, oh, well, let's hire Stedman for Vegas. And so we sent Vegas over to Ralph, and Ralph sent back those drawings. But I don't think they had one interaction together when they were covering the America's Cup. And they just hit it off enormously. I think that, everybody thinks that Hunter was crazy, but Ralph was really the crazy one. And I mean, he would act on all those things that, Hunter was a little too responsible to do, things. And Ralph was, without drugs, a little mad. And they just sparked together. They saw it together. Ralph to this day worships Hunter. I mean, they were very close.
And our final question for the evening.
Give us your 3 best practical jokes between you and Hunter Thompson back and forth.
Well, there was very little back and forth. It was all forth on me. Hunter would do things like, well, what would he do? All right, well, he'd come to my house in terms of, he'd steal stuff. He'd take my amplifying system, like I had these Macintosh amplifiers. And I'd come the next day, because I had gone to work, and he'd still sleep, and then they'd be gone, And he said, send me a bill for them. Then one night in San Francisco, we're sitting around the fire, it's late at night in my living room, and we're listening to Joni Mitchell, and we're all taking acid, and Hunter takes a fire extinguisher and blasted off. Do you know what's in a fire extinguisher? It's just like powdery, awful stuff. It goes everywhere, and it's got taste in your mouth. So he thought there was a riot, and I said, get the fuck out of here. And I was just furious, and you asshole. And then the next day he come in and said, you know what, I'm just gonna have to live with this. Of course, he did it again to me 20 years later. He comes to my office in New York now. We're not sitting around a fire late at night. I'm in my office, I've got a coat and tie on. There are people around. There's it's the whole thing. And he does it again with the film crew. And he thought this was very funny. So anyway, or like we're driving up to Maine one night from Boston, and he says, let's take some acid on the map. So we take some acid, and then as we're driving, you start to get to all the windy roads up to Maine. He turns the lights off, turns the headlights off. Now I was of two minds. One was completely, this is totally wrong. The other was, I have full confidence in his abilities, and I just have to trust it. So, and then also I knew what he wanted really was to scare me. So I was kind of getting on the scare thing, like, oh God, no. And that would just make him laugh and giggle and be even worse. I realized later what he had done was, because he turned them on and then turned them off, is he would look 3 bends ahead and memorize the curves and know where he was going, or the moonlight or something, some trick, but it worked. It was great. I was getting it. Okay, so.
Thank you, Chris, for
No editors ever had to put up with that in American history.
Thank you so much for being with us and sharing with us. Appreciate it. And I know you're all going to, if you haven't read it yet, you're going to enjoy your autographed copies very much.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.